make work easier and safer for construction workers, window washers, painters, and others who work in areas that are hard to reach. Yet, workers who erect, use, and dismantle scaffold are at risk for serious injuries and death. This course presents important basic information on scaffolds, including hazards and safe work practices, that can help you protect yourself and your co-workers on the job. This course has 7 sections. Section 1 addresses requirements and responsibilities for safe scaffold use. Section 2 describes the hazards of scaffold, and Section 3 covers the types of scaffold. Section 4 is about erecting scaffolds. Section 5 discusses fall protection, and Section 6 presents safe work practices. The final section is about inspection and maintenance of scaffold. A short quiz will follow at the very end. You will click the link below once you have watched the video to complete the quiz. By the end of this course, you will be able to explain responsibilities for safe scaffold use, identify items to inspect, and name different types of scaffold. You will also be able to name types of scaffolds, describe hazards of scaffolds, list types of fall protection, and recognize safe work practices when working with scaffolds. Requirements and responsibilities. By the end of this section, you will be able to define the term competent person. You will also be able to describe the responsibilities of employers, supervisors, and workers for scaffold safety, and explain how to find the scaffold regulations that apply in your workplace. Employers have a general duty to make sure the workplace is safe. They must train workers on scaffold hazards and ensure safe work practices and provide necessary personal protective equipment and training on how to use it. Employers must appoint competent supervisors and immediately report critical injuries to the government's Occupational Health and Safety Agency. Acting on behalf of the employer, a supervisor or manager must make sure use required personal protective equipment. He or she must advise workers of actual and potential hazards of their work and take every reasonable precaution to protect them from harm. Workers must comply with occupational health and safety regulations. They must use personal protective equipment as directed, report hazards, and use required safety equipment. Workers are responsible for using safe work practices and working safely. Each province, territory, and the federal government has its own occupational health and safety legislation. Scaffolding regulations may vary from place to place. That's why it is important to know the scaffolding regulations that apply where you work. Local occupational health and safety agencies are excellent sources of information about scaffold regulations that apply in your workplace. You can find contact information for these agencies on the website of the Canadian Centre for Occupational Health and Safety at the address on this slide. You can also find your local agency in the telephone directory blue pages. The Canadian Standards Association, or CSA, has produced a number of best practice standards related to scaffold work. The competent person plays an important role in scaffold work. He or she has the knowledge, training, and experience to organize the work and knows the regulations that apply. He or she knows the hazards of scaffold work in general and of particular workplace. The competent person trains erectors and dismantlers to recognize these hazards and inspect scaffolds before each shift. Before using a scaffold, workers must be trained on the hazards of the work and the work area, precautions to take to prevent harm, and the load and load-carrying capacities of the scaffolds they will use. Workers who erect, dismantle, operate, inspect, or repair scaffolds need additional training on how to perform their duty safely. In this section, you learned about employer, supervisor, and worker responsibilities for safe scaffold use. You learned that occupational health and safety requirements for scaffolds vary by location and how to find the regulations that apply to your workplace. You also learned about a competent person and training as they related to scaffolds. Hazards of scaffolds. By the end of this section, you will be able to describe causes of falls from scaffolds, explain how to protect workers from falling objects, and list electrical hazards of work on scaffolds. Falls, collapse, electrical hazards, and falling objects are the most common hazards of scaffolds. Scaffold erectors and dismantlers are at particular risk since they work on scaffolds when safe access, guardrails, and platforms are not entirely in place. Falls from elevation are the most common scaffold hazard. They account for over 1/2 of all scaffold accidents. Over 70% of scaffold fatalities are from falls from platforms or access. Lack of fall protection and the failure of planking are common causes of falls from scaffolds. Planking may be unsecured with too little or too much overhang, or made from poor quality lumber. Unsafe work practices like standing or sitting on a guardrail also lead to falls. You will learn more about fall protection and safe and unsafe practices later in this course. Scaffolds collapse when they are unstable or overloaded and from high winds and equipment failure. 2 workers performing maintenance on a dam elevator were killed when the scaffold they were using collapsed and fell into the water below. A faulty bracket clip caused the collapse. 3 workers died when a scaffold collapsed because it was overloaded with bricks and debris. Workers may be electrocuted when erecting, moving, or working for metal or conductive scaffolds near uninsulated overhead power lines. 3 workers were killed and another 3 seriously burned when they tried to move a mobile scaffold under an overhead power line and a guardrail hit the power line. Electrical hazards on scaffolds include contact with overhead power lines and the failure of equipment insulation. Workers and pedestrians on the ground are at risk of being hit by tools, material, or debris falling from a scaffold. 2 pedestrians received serious injuries when a pole fell off of the scaffold and hit them on the head. Take a close look at this photograph of people working on a scaffold. What hazards do you see? The workers are at risk of falling because there is no fall protection in place, neither guardrails nor personal fall protection. Also, unless there is a catch basin we cannot see, people under the scaffold could be hit by tools or materials that fall from the platform. In this section, we learned about hazards of scaffolds. We talked about falls, collapse, electrical hazards, falling objects, and unsafe practices. Types of scaffolds. By the end of this section, you will be able to define scaffold, explain the difference between supported and suspended scaffolds, and recognize different types of scaffolds. The scaffold is a temporary structure that supports a platform elevated above the ground. It provides a working surface for workers, tools, and materials. There are 3 basic types of scaffolds: supported scaffolds, suspended scaffolds, and mechanically operated scaffolds, such as man lifts and aerial work platforms. This course focuses on supported scaffolds and suspended scaffolds. Supported scaffolds have 1 or more platforms supported by outrigger beams, brackets, poles, legs, posts, frames, or other rigid supports. There are several different types of supported scaffolds: frame or fabricated scaffolds, mobile or rolling scaffolds, ladder jack scaffolds, and tube and coupler scaffolds are among the most widely used types of supported scaffolds. A frame or fabricated scaffold consists of a platform supported on fabricated end frames with built-in posts. Fabricated scaffolds are the most common type of supported scaffold because they are versatile, economical, and easy to use. They may be used in 1 or 2 tiers or several stories high. Mounted on casters or wheels, mobile or rolling scaffolds are easy to move. Painters, plasterers, and other workers who have to change positions frequently favor these portable suspended scaffolds. Another type is a narrow frame scaffold. It's got wheels and often used as a mobile scaffold with an end frame measuring less than 3 feet. It's designed to be easily moved and typically used by painters, drywallers, or other trades that must frequently move the scaffolding to other positions. The ladder jack scaffold consists of a platform resting on brackets that are attached to ladders. Inexpensive and portable, they are meant to hold only 1 or 2 people. Tube and coupler scaffolds have coupling devices that connect tubing. They can be assembled in different configurations, making them very versatile, also very strong. They are used where scaffolds need to support heavy loads. A suspended scaffold consists of a platform suspended from above by wires, ropes, or chains, or other non-rigid load-carrying suspension system. Suspended scaffolds are particularly useful for accessing hard-to-reach work locations. Swing stage or two-point, single-point adjustable, and multi-level adjustable are three types of suspended scaffolds. The swing stage or two-point scaffold is the most common suspended scaffold, commonly used by window washers and in high-rise construction. The platform is suspended by two wire ropes attached to an overhead structure. A single-point adjustable scaffold is suspended by just one rope. Like the double point, it can be moved up and down. A multi-level adjustable suspension scaffold has a series of platforms at various levels. They are suspended by two or more wire ropes. With the platforms resting on common hangers, the platforms can be moved up or down. Take a look at the scaffolds on this page. For each scaffold, decide whether it is a supported scaffold or a suspended scaffold. That's right, you guessed it. The scaffold on the left is a supported scaffold. The platform is supported by the ground by rigid supports. The scaffold on the right is a suspended scaffold. The platform is suspended from overhead by non-rigid wire ropes. In this section, you learned that a scaffold is a temporary structure that supports an elevated platform above the ground. You learned about different types of supported and suspended scaffolds. Erecting scaffolds. By the end of this section, you will be able to name at least 4 things to consider when selecting scaffolds. You will also be able to name 3 safe ways to access a scaffold. Explain the purpose of a stable base and list ways to stabilize scaffolds. Many factors go into the selection of the right scaffold for a job. Considerations include the height needed for the job, as well as the type and the duration of the work. Weather must be considered, as some scaffolds are more stable than others in inclement weather. Load, location, and the likelihood of pedestrians passing underneath must also be taken into account. Scaffolds should be erected, moved, dismantled, or altered only under the supervision of a competent person. Scaffolding must be erected and dismantled according to the manufacturer's instructions. The scaffold must be able to support at least 4 times the maximum likely load, including workers, materials, tools, and equipment. The rated load is the maximum load for the scaffold specified by the manufacturer. The rated load must never be exceeded. Scaffolds must not be loaded over their maximum intended loads or rated capacities. Load includes the scaffold itself, the workers and tools, materials, and equipment. All uprights must rest on a firm ground with mud sills and base plates or other firm foundation. The support must be able to withstand all expected loads. The scaffold and its platform must be perfectly level to minimize the risk of workers losing balance and falling off. If the ground is loose and uneven, adjustable screw jacks can keep the scaffold level. Don't use bricks, blocks, barrels, or other unstable objects to level a scaffold. The legs of the scaffold must be plumb. Bracing may be horizontal, vertical, or diagonal. The scaffold should be tied off or braced to a solid structure as needed for stability. It is important not to force braces to fit. Instead, level the scaffold for an easy fit. To maintain stability, a scaffold needs to be tied into a structure, stabilized with guy wires or secured by stabilizers or outriggers if the height of the scaffold is more than 3 or 4 times the width of the base. Regulations may vary. Falling object protection must be erected as needed to protect workers and pedestrians from falling materials, tools, and debris. Tow boards, barricades, screening, and catch platforms offer protection against falling objects. Platforms may be wood or metal in accordance with the job requirements, regulations, and manufacturer's instructions. Platforms must be completely planked with planks of uniform thickness. Built-in rest platforms are required at certain heights and intervals. Regulations and manufacturer's instructions specify a minimum width for platforms as well as acceptable length of extended planks and overlapping. Painted, cracked, or heavily knotted planks should not be used for platforms. Employers must ensure safe access to scaffolds through stair towers, ramps, walkways, or ladders. Staircases may be used for long-term jobs. Slip-resistant treads help protect against falls. Now time for an activity. List 3 ways to stabilize a scaffold. Yeah, that's correct. A scaffold can be stabilized by tying it into a structure, attaching guy wires, or using stabilizers or outriggers. In this section, you learned some of the considerations for selecting scaffolds. We talked about power lines, bases, bracing, stability, loads, platforms, and falling object protection. Section 5, Fall Protection. After this section, you will be able to name the 2 types of fall protection and the parts of a guardrail. You will be able to explain the difference between fall arrest systems and travel restraint systems. And you will be able to list the basic components of a personal fall protection system. Guardrails are the most common and most effective way to protect workers from falls from supported scaffolds. They are required for supported scaffolds above a certain height, typically over 3 meters or 10 feet. Guardrails must be able to withstand any likely load. Where required, they must be in place before workers use the scaffold. Typical guardrail specifications include a top rail 1 meter or 3 feet above the platform, a mid-rail halfway between the top rail and platform, and a toe board 100 millimeters or 4 inches high. Personal fall protection includes travel restraint systems, which prevent falls, and fall arrest systems, which stop falls. Employers need to make sure workers have required personal fall protection equipment, are trained how to use, and to use it safely. Personal fall protection includes, at a minimum, a body harness, lanyard, and anchorage. The lanyard connects the body harness to the anchorage. Another activity. Match the word or phrase in the first column with the best choice in the right column. Nicely done. Travel restraint systems prevent falls, but guardrails are the most effective way to prevent falls. Fall arrest systems stop falls. In this section, you learned about the 2 types of fall protection, guardrails and personal fall protection, which includes both travel restraint systems and fall arrest systems. Safe work practices. By the end of this section, you will be able to recognize unsafe work practices, explain how to work safely near overhead power lines, and list types of personal protective equipment for work on scaffolds. Workers must use a proper means of access, such as stair towers, ladders, or ramps to reach the working platform. Do not use the scaffold frame or bracing to access a work area. Be especially careful when entering or leaving the platform. Guardrails are in place to protect you from falling. Do not climb or stand on guardrails or rest material or tools on them. If you remove a guardrail to hoist materials, replace it right away. Using the right personal protective equipment is an important safe work practice. Personal fall protection and non-slip protective footwear are common PPE for scaffold work. Workers beneath the scaffold need head protection to protect them from falling objects. Depending on the situation and the hazards of the job, scaffold workers may also need gloves, eye protection, hearing protectors, high visibility clothing, or even respirators. Most overhead power lines are energized, so workers need to be aware of power lines near scaffold sites. If the required clearance distance cannot be maintained, the power company should be contacted to de-energize the lines. When moving scaffolds near overhead lines, workers need to take extra care to make sure there is enough clearance. Know the rated workload and never load in excess of it. Don't use a ladder, bucket, or other contrivance to reach up higher, and don't jump on planks or platforms. Do not walk or stand on braces. Don't work on snow or ice-covered platforms, and don't work on scaffold during storms or high winds. If the wind picks up or the snow accumulates, this fabricator could be in trouble. Every worker must follow the regulations set down by law, as well as the rules and policies of the employer. As you already know, regulations for scaffolds may vary in different provinces and territories. Take a look at this photo of a worker on a scaffold. What safe work practices do you see? What unsafe work practices do you see? The scaffold has a guardrail and the worker is wearing fall protection. However, tools and equipment are resting on the guardrail. That's unsafe because anything on the guardrail could easily fall and hit a person below. In this section, you learned about safe access to scaffolds and guardrail safety. You learned about PPE, power lines, and what not to do when erecting, using, or dismantling scaffolds. You also learned that you must follow all rules and regulations which vary in different locations. Inspection and maintenance. By the end of this section, you will be able to explain who should do scaffold inspections and when to do the inspections. You will also be able to list at least 5 items to check during a scaffold inspection and describe what to do with damaged parts. Inspection, maintenance, and repairs must be done according to standards, regulations, and manufacturer's instructions. A competent person should inspect scaffolds before each shift and after an event that could damage the scaffold, such as being hit by a vehicle. A log should be kept of inspections, maintenance, and repairs. An inspection of the platform looks at the condition of the decking, including the overlap and extension. The competent person needs to check the brackets and make sure the weight load is not exceeded. Before each shift, the competent person needs to make sure the base is sound, level and adjusted properly, and the legs are plumb, with braces in place. Cross members need to be level, and planks, decks, and guardrails installed and secure. Motors, platforms, and wire ropes should be checked for corrosion. Frames, braces, and other parts need to be checked for bends, damage, rust, and wear and tear. Personal fall protection should be inspected periodically by a person qualified to do so. Users must inspect their personal fall protection equipment each time before they use it. They need to be trained on how to inspect the equipment. Damaged parts must not be used. If they cannot be repaired immediately, they should be removed from service and replaced before anyone uses the scaffold. A 27-year-old laborer was working on a suspended scaffold when he lost his balance and fell from the scaffolding. His safety lanyard broke and he fell to the ground. He died at the scene from blunt force trauma to the head. What might have prevented his death? A properly trained worker would have inspected his or her personal fall protection system before using it and would have spotted the faulty lanyard. If the lanyard had been found and replaced, the worker may not have fallen to his death. In this section, you learn that inspections must be done according to regulations and manufacturer's recommendations. A competent person is the best person to conduct the inspections, which need to be done daily and after any potentially damaging incident. All components should be checked, damaged parts immediately repaired or replaced. In this course, you learned about requirements and responsibilities for safe scaffold use. You learned about the hazards of scaffolds and types of scaffolds. As well, the important information about erecting scaffolds. We discussed fall protection and safe work practices and ended the course with an inspection and maintenance. You have completed scaffold safety. Please click on the link to complete the quiz.